The doors began to slide apart, and I knew at once, this wasn't my floor. It wasn't even my stairwell. There was no familiar landing with green-painted walls and a garbage chute. The elevator opened directly into someone's apartment. A thick, nauseating stench hit my nose, stale sweat, old food, and something sickly sweet, like rotting apples. The light was dim and yellow, coming from an old floor lamp in the corner. I saw a sagging couch with gray, greasy sheets bunched on it, stained with dark brown blotches. I reached for the door close button, my fingers shaking. And then I heard it. Shuffling. Heavy, wet shuffling from the adjacent room, hidden in half-darkness. Someone was coming toward me. I slammed the close button, but the doors didn't move. The mechanism was jammed. Then I looked at the mirror on the elevator wall. On the glass, from inside the cabin, right at the level of my face, greasy, smeared fingerprints appeared. As if someone invisible was standing beside me, leaning against the glass, waiting for the apartment's owner to come out and greet them. This happened to me 3 years ago, in a sleeping district of Ekaterinburg. I still live in this city, but now I only rent apartments on the first floor. Doctors say it's post-traumatic stress, that my brain filled in hallucinations under stress. But I know what I saw. And I know that smell soaked into my clothes so deeply that I had to burn them. I always hated that building. A typical 9-story panel block from the late Soviet era, gray, oppressive, as if it had absorbed the depression of all its residents over the past 30 years. I moved there because it was cheap. The apartment had belonged to my grandmother, and as a part-time student working night shifts at a warehouse, I couldn't afford anything better. That night I got home around 3 in the morning. The shift had been hellish, my legs throbbed as if lead had been poured into them. Outside, a fine, miserable rain was falling, turning the slushy snow underfoot into filthy mush. I dreamed of only one thing, a hot shower and sleep. Entering the stairwell, I instinctively grimaced at the smell of cat urine and dampness. The light bulb on the first floor flickered, creating a strobe effect that made my head ache. I walked up to the elevator. Old, Soviet era, with brown doors covered in layers of peeling paint and cigarette-burned graffiti. I pressed the call button. The plastic was cold and sticky. Somewhere in the shaft, a motor hummed, cables screeched, a sound like the groan of some enormous dying animal. The elevator was descending from the 8th floor. I leaned my forehead against the cold wall, closed my eyes, and listened to the cabin crawl downward. Thud. The elevator stopped. The doors creaked open. Inside was empty. A dim lamp under the ceiling barely lit the cabin, paneled in fake wood laminate. A pizza delivery flyer lay on the floor. I stepped inside, feeling the floor sag slightly under my weight, springing on its cables. I pressed 7. The button was dented and burned around the edges, the number almost worn away. The doors closed with a heavy clang, cutting me off from the sounds of the stairwell. The cabin jerked and began to rise. I stared at my reflection in the cloudy mirror on the back wall. Dark circles under my eyes, wet hair, an exhausted gaze. Just an ordinary guy with no energy left even for fear. Then I noticed something strange. The sound. Normally the elevator hummed monotonously, almost soothing. But today something else was mixed into the motor's drone. A foreign, rhythmic tapping. Tap tap tap. As if someone outside, standing on the roof of the cabin, was lightly knocking on the metal with their knuckles. I lifted my head and looked at the ceiling. There was only the light fixture, with dead flies trapped inside. Just an old mechanism, I told myself. The cables are worn. Something's catching somewhere. The elevator passed the 3rd floor. The 4th. The 5th. On the 6th floor, the light flickered. Once. Twice. Then it went out completely for a second, plunging me into absolute darkness. In that darkness, the tapping stopped. Instead, I heard breathing. Heavy, raspy breathing. Right by my ear. The light snapped back on. I jerked, stumbling toward the control panel, and looked around wildly. There was no one in the elevator. My heart hammered somewhere in my throat. "Calm down," I whispered. "You're imagining it. You haven't slept in 20 hours. I looked at the floor indicator. The numbers weren't lit. The elevator was still going up, but it felt like it had been too long. We should have passed the 7th floor by now. But the cabin didn't slow. The vibration under my feet intensified. The motor's hum rose into a high, unpleasant screech. I started frantically pressing 7, then stop, then cancel. Nothing. The buttons were dead. Suddenly, the elevator braked hard. I lurched forward, barely keeping my balance. My stomach jumped into my throat. The cabin froze. Silence fell, so dense my ears rang. No neighbors. No street noise. Not even the hum of wires. Then the doors began to open. I expected my floor. Green walls. Uncle Pettia's doormat. The smell of fried potatoes. But the doors opened into that apartment. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. My brain refused to process it. Right beyond the elevator threshold was parquet flooring. Old, dried-out parquet laid in a herringbone pattern. No landing. The elevator was built straight into the wall of a living room. I stood frozen, my finger hovering over the door close button. Air rushed into the cabin instantly, thick, warm, and foul. It smelled of illness and unwashed flesh, mixed with cheap incense trying to mask the stench. The room was furnished with furniture from the 70s. A bulky sideboard filled with crystal that glinted dully in the lamp's light. A wall carpet with deer. And the couch. That same couch with the crumpled sheets. They looked damp. On the floor beside it stood a plate with something covered in green mold. "Hello?" My voice sounded pathetic, shrill. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Only the buzz of the lamp. I stepped back, pressing my spine against the elevator mirror. This was a mistake. The elevator had broken. I'd ended up in some penthouse. But there were no penthouses in my building. And the apartment layouts were completely different. Then I heard the shuffling. The sound came from a dark opening to the right, likely a hallway or kitchen. Xhrk. Xhrk. The sound of bare feet tearing themselves away from a sticky floor. Someone was slowly approaching the room where the elevator had opened. Panic washed over me in an icy wave. I began pounding the door close button. Come on, close, you bastard, I whispered, never taking my eyes off the dark opening. A hand emerged from the darkness. Pale, with long, yellow nails. It gripped the doorframe. The fingers were unnaturally long, joints bulging like knots. I smashed the button with my fist. The doors shuddered and began to crawl toward each other. Slowly. Agonizingly slowly. A figure drifted out of the darkness. I saw the edge of a greasy bathrobe. Part of a face, sagging skin, gray as ash. And an eye. One cloudy, milky eye that wasn't looking at me, but through me. Guests, the voice rasped. It sounded as if the speaker's throat were stuffed with dry leaves. We have guests. The doors slammed shut with a loud clang, cutting me off from the nightmare. I slid down the wall onto the floor, gasping for air. I was shaking. What was that? Where did I go? The elevator jerked again and started moving. But not down, to release me into the stairwell. It went up. The speed increased. The motor's hum turned into a roar. The cabin vibrated so violently I thought it would tear itself apart. I curled into a ball on the filthy floor, covering my head with my arms. We were going up for far too long. My building had 9 floors. Even from the first to the last, it would take maybe 30 seconds. We'd been moving for 2 minutes. Pressure built in my ears. The air grew cold, my breath fogged. The stench of sweat vanished, replaced by a sharp, metallic smell of ozone, like before a thunderstorm. Suddenly, the elevator stopped as abruptly as before. The light went out. I lay in total darkness, afraid to move. Please, enough, I whispered into the void. Let me out. Something clicked in the dark. A light came on, not the usual one, but emergency lighting, dim and red. The doors opened. This time there was a corridor. A long, endless corridor with concrete walls painted a dirty blue. The linoleum floor was bubbled and warped. Along the walls stood rows of identical metal doors, like in a hospital or a morgue. But the worst thing wasn't that. Directly opposite the elevator, on the far wall, hung a huge mirror. I looked into it and saw the elevator cabin. Saw myself sitting on the floor. But in the reflection, in the cabin, I wasn't alone. Right behind me, in the corner, stood a tall, gaunt figure wrapped in those same filthy sheets I'd seen in the apartment. Its face was hidden, but I saw the hands, the same long fingers with yellow nails. They were reaching for my neck. I screamed and spun around. The corner of the elevator was empty. I looked back at the mirror in the corridor. The figure in the reflection was closer now. Its hands were almost touching my shoulders. The reflection lived its own life. The creature leaned slowly toward my ear, and I saw its mouth, a black void with no teeth. I understood, if it touched me in the reflection, would die here. I had to run. I bolted out of the elevator into the corridor. My feet slipped on the linoleum. The air was icy and stale. I ran to the right, blindly, away from the cursed mirror. "Stay," the echo whispered behind me. I didn't turn around. I ran past metal doors. Some had numbers: 1045, 1046, 1047. There were far too many for a normal building. Behind one door I heard a child crying. Behind another, the sound of a drill boring straight into my brain. Behind a third, a dog barking that turned into a human scream. This wasn't my home. It was the underside. A place where lost things and lost people end up. Ahead, the corridor ended in a dead end. A wall. Solid concrete. I skidded to a stop, nearly slamming into it, and turned. At the far end of the corridor, where the elevator doors stood open, the sheet-wrapped figure was stepping out of the cabin. It moved unnaturally, in jerks, like a broken marionette. SHRK. SHRK. It was coming toward me. To my left was a door. No number. Just smooth metal. I yanked the handle. Locked. The creature drew closer. Now I could see its face more clearly. It had no eyes. None at all. Just smooth skin where eye sockets should have been. But it saw me. It was smiling. I started pounding on the door. "Open up. Help me." The creature was 10 meters away. The stench of rot reached me even here. I kicked the door with all my strength. The lock cracked but held. The creature raised an arm, pointing at me. "You came." And then I remembered the lighter in my pocket. A stupid, pointless thought, but the only one I had. I pulled it out, flicked the wheel. A tiny flame lit the gray concrete. I raised the flame to the fire sensor on the ceiling. 1 second. 2. The plastic began to melt. The creature hissed, recoiling from the light, as if the fire hurt it. Suddenly, a deafening siren wailed. The fire alarm triggered. Jets of water burst from the ceiling, icy, rusty water. The water hit the creature. It screamed, a sound like metal scraping glass. Its skin began to smoke, as if the water were acid. It staggered back toward the elevator. I knew this was my chance. I lunged forward, straight at it. The creature swung a clawed hand, trying to catch me. Something sharp ripped across my jacket, tearing fabric and raking my shoulder. Pain flared, but I didn't stop. I slipped past it on the slick linoleum and dove back into the open elevator cabin. The creature howled and lunged after me. Its long arms grabbed the door edges, holding them apart. I started smashing the control panel, kicking, punching, throwing my whole body at it. Down. Down. The creature shoved its head into the gap between the doors. Its eyeless face was centimeters from mine. Grave cold breath washed over me. "Stay," it hissed. I kicked it square in the face. There was a wet crunch. The creature recoiled. The doors slammed shut. The elevator dropped. It didn't descend, it fell. I was thrown into the ceiling, smashing my shoulder painfully. The cabin shook so violently the light bulb burst, showering me with glass. We were plunging into an abyss. I screamed, but I couldn't hear myself over the roar of metal. I thought I was going to die. I prayed to die, just not to return to that corridor. A brutal impact. Darkness. Silence. I lay curled on the cabin floor, racked with pain. A smell hit my nose. Bleach? The doors slowly, reluctantly opened. I lifted my head. First floor. My stairwell. Flickering bulb. Graffiti on the walls, "Soy lives" and "Lenka is stupid." I crawled out of the elevator on all fours, straight into the grime on the stairwell floor. I had never been so happy to see cigarette butts and trash. I looked back at the elevator. It stood empty, dark, harmless. But on the mirror inside the cabin, I saw it. Fresh, greasy handprints. Huge, with long fingers. They were on the glass from the inside. And they were slowly sliding downward, leaving cloudy streaks, as if someone invisible were standing there right now, watching my back. I jumped up and ran outside into the cold rain, not feeling the pain in my shoulder. I moved out the next day. I didn't take my things. I just dropped the keys into the mailbox and went to stay with a friend. I still have a scar on my shoulder, 3 long, ragged marks that sometimes ache before it rains. 3 years have passed since then. I live in a new building, on the 1st floor. I never use elevators. Not in malls. Not in offices. I take the stairs. But sometimes, when I walk past closed elevator doors in some building, I hear it. A quiet, barely audible sound. Tap tap tap. Knuckles knocking on metal from the other side. And I know it didn't stay in that building. It travels through shafts. It searches. And one night, when you're heading home late, tired and half asleep, the doors may open not on your floor. And you will smell it. The smell of sweat and rotten apples. If that happens, don't step out. Hit the door close button. Press it until your fingers turn white. Because if you step out, you will stay there forever. Good night.